Welcome back to Within Reason. Bob Kerrigan is away. I'm Bill Rankin, and with me is Dr. Elebash, and we've been pleased to have him on for the whole show talking about important local issues, and I think we're kind of unique in that. You know, I mean, and we're also somewhat proud of it that we've been able to talk about without fear or favor, talking about the local issues. And if you talk about the problems, there's always somebody that doesn't like it, and I'm sure there's some folks who are not crazy about some of your opinions, which
yes,
and maybe have made it known to you. But there's nothing they can do to you. You're retired,
That's right.
Yeah. And we've talked about it before on the show, but it's very, very important, and it's the issue of public sector pensions. And actually, it's not just pensions, because we pay health care for some retirees,
That's right.
which is another expense. Is what's going on in Pensacola part of a national trend of problems with public sector pensions? What are the problems? Is it just that the stock market collapsed?
Well, first I must say, this is a real critical issue, because it's very important to the employees, and it's very important to the employer, which in this case is the city. It's a nationwide problem.
And the employees, and we have some very good employees, we'll tell you. We're taking less in salary. That's probably less true now. We take less in salary to have good retirement, and the public safety people have shorter careers, and they were promised this.
That's right.
That's what they will be very quick to tell you.
But it's in their best interest and the city's best interest is to come to some sort of accommodation that reduces the obligation. Now, the obligation is big. The last actuary, I really should defer to you because you were on the pension committee, but if I give some wrong numbers, you can correct me. The last actuary report about a year ago, it said that the city of Pensacola pension funds, of which there are three main ones, but there are a couple of others, had an unfunded liability of about $115 million.
What does that mean?
That means
an unfunded liability.
That means if you project out future benefits and future revenues, you're short $115 million.
Over what period of time?
Well, normally in pension funds, either private pension funds under federal law or public pension funds under the respective state laws, they usually give a 20 or 30-year period to make it up. So it doesn't happen. It's not all at once. It's made up.
But even if you divided it by that big number of years, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. Well, that's 115. Now, in addition, as you mentioned, the city's also promised health benefits to retirees, and there's none of it's funded. And an actuarial report, they haven't had an actuarial report on that in about 3 or 4
years. Does the city just fund it as the bills come in?
That's right. And that would be about $35 million. So we're up to $150 million.
Wow.
And then there's a wild card. And the wild card is the assumed rate of return on investments.
Oh, yeah. And it's probably worth talking about this, because it's easy to throw it around like you know something.
You just dealt with it. I'll back off.
Well, no, first of all, and we've talked about it on the show, and it's not readily understandable. You have to think about it a little bit. There's an actuarial rate that gets set for pension funds, and I guess it's true for all pension funds. You have to
all defined benefit funds.
Right, not 401ks. So you have to make. You correct me if I'm wrong. You're a finance professor, and I never took a finance course, but you have to assume that your investments. Then there's a lot of money invested for all these pension funds, just not enough, but a lot of money will bring a certain rate of return. And what's the rate of return that's assumed now?
Assumed is 8%.
8%. Now, what we know, if you look at MSNBC and read Warren Buffett about what we can expect to get back on our investments, is that a tad high?
That might have been reasonable in the 1990s, but it's now clear, I think, that the American economy, the world economy, is changing, and we cannot assume that we're going to get a return of 8% on average a year. And so that means that the $150 million we've added up so far
is a little short.
Is a little short. That's right. And that's a very, very sensitive issue. because if all of a sudden the city changes its actuarial assumption from 8 to 6, that tens of millions of dollars. I'm not an actuary, but I would, on the back of the
But you
envelope,
know
I think it'd be tens
of
of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And if, well, let's talk about not only what it is, but what happens. So let's say, and we'll talk about the mechanism of it. Let's say the actual rate does go down. And some people are talking about 5 would be more reasonable. But let's say it goes down substantially.
I would.
What happens?
Well, what happens is when you get your next actuarial report, you find that your unfunded liability has gone up substantially.
And then, so some actuary writes on a piece of paper, okay, unfunded liabilities are $200 million. What does that mean? What happens? Does the city have to come up with more money right now?
That means that according to state law, you got next 20 or 30 years, whatever the law is now, you've got to take steps
start paying
to
that
eliminate,
down.
To eliminate
so the state will say to the city,
that's right.
And if the investments aren't enough, the city's on the hook for it, right?
That's right. That's right.
Our little city.
And in the old days, the rationale was, well, cities can raise taxes. Well, they can't do that anymore.
Well,
not substantially.
The city can raise taxes a little bit, but at what cost? I mean, we're trying to attract businesses.
It's in the best interest of the city and the employees. The city doesn't want a bunch of disgruntled employees. You know. We have good city services in this community.
Yeah, I think we do.
Yeah, we have. I think we do too. And we've got to find some kind of accommodation.
But we've made promises, and the one I know about, I was on the police pension board, the one I know about most is the policemen. We've made some promises to these policemen that quite frankly, don't make a lot of sense. I mean, they're just too generous. For example, when a city policeman retires, he has paid in the military, as I understand it, and you would know because you retired from the military, you get a rate of return based on your rank and your years of service and stuff. And if you want a survivor benefit, you take a little less, don't you?
That's right.
In other words, you have to put away a certain amount of money. You pick a person or a bunch of people and you say, well, we're going to have to pay this pension for so many years. But if you have to pay the pension for the life of both the pensioner and the spouse, on average, that's going to be more years. So that's going to cost more money. So if you elect the spousal benefit, then you take less in your retirement. And that's I guess when you retire from the military, you have to check a box, and it's an important decision. Well, for the city police, they make no such election. They're going to get all their pension money, and whoever they're married to at the end of their life just keeps getting that pension money. And I came up with
Not even a reduced amount?
Not a reduced amount, 100%. So it's not reduced anywhere except reducing the pockets of the taxpayers. And I came up with this, and I've mentioned it a couple of times. So, a 70-year-old retired policeman with heart trouble who's single can decide, well, I'm going to give a $2 or $3 million benefit to my favorite barmaid. Come on up, and on my deathbed, we'll get married. I said, is that possible? Yes. You don't have to be married at the time of your retirement. You just have to be legally married. Well, a notary can marry you in about 10 minutes and thus give a gift of city money to, let's say, marry somebody who's 20 years old for the rest of their life with cost of living increases. And I don't know what the cost of that is, but it's got to be a staggering cost. Now, the politicians, I guess, because they want to be favored by the Fraternal Order of Police.
Part of the problem is that both the firemen and the police pension funds get some state money.
Yes.
And the state makes some rules and regulations at the instigation of the fire and police organizations. Yeah. And if you don't comply with them, then you lose the state money.
Right. Right.
About 30 years ago, that almost happened with the police fund.
So that forces them to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So there there are just a lot of problems with it, and we know it can be gamed the way they decide on what your pension's going to be. And I think in the police it's the best 3 out of the last 5 years or something.
I don't know.
Well, you can spike it. I mean, with the collusion of other soon-to-be retirees, you just get tons of overtime, and that not only affects the amount of money you're getting that year, it affects the next however long you live, 30, 40, 50 years if you're lucky. Yeah. And it's just it's just awfully, awfully expensive.
And it's big business. I looked up today to see how much the pension funds were worth. Now, this is last year's numbers, but there are $250 million in the three major pension funds.
Yeah. It's a lot of
That's
money.
a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah. Well, pension stuff is interesting, isn't it? I mean, when you're on one of these pension boards, the nice thing about it, the pension boards are volunteers. You don't get, they'll give you a cup of coffee and water at the meeting is about it. But they'll send you to these seminars. And all these big shot money people are there because when I was on the police board, I think we had something like $40 million, which is minuscule in public pension terms, but it's an awful lot of money. And think of all these cities all around, billions and billions of dollars. So a lot of big shot money managing people would show up and they'd teach you a lot. And it was very interesting. Yeah.
As a matter of interest, the general fund and the police fund are currently funded at about 65% of their what you should have. The firemen's a little better. They're about 85%.
And they contribute more now. They
contribute 11% of their.
Well, the police, I think it's like 0.5% now.
Well, the firemen contribute 11%.
Yeah.
The firemen are the best informed people around because firemen have to sit a lot of time in the firehouse.
When they're not fighting fires,
they all become lawyers. They all become pension lawyers.
Well, first of all, I've had a lot of interaction in various ways. We've represented some, witnesses. They may not be finance professors with PhDs, but they're smart people, and they know a lot about it.
On the Firemen's Pension Board, and they're good people, and they're conscientious people.
And they're knowledgeable.
Oh, very knowledgeable.
And of course,
very knowledgeable.
Yeah. So if one side has all the knowledge and the regular taxpayers are out there snoozing in front of their TVs, you wind up in this situation. So what's the remedy? I mean, we've got collective bargaining.
And the remedy is that it's so important to both parties to reach some kind of an accommodation that will relieve some of the pressure on the city fund. Because apparently, I haven't projected it and not seen a projection, but apparently it ain't going to get better.
Right.
It's not going to get better, and they've got to have some kind of accommodation.
Yeah. Well, every year you're not making your actuarial rate just adds to the problem.
That's right.
I mean,
and really the actuarial rate don't make any difference because what makes difference?
That's the money.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, a lower actuarial rate may force a little prudence because you wouldn't have quite the unfunded liabilities.
It might.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do we have? And I don't know about other states, but we had separate boards and separate pension funds for police, fire, and the general fund. And now the general fund's become a little more complicated because a lot of those folks are in the state retirement system. What is that the way it's done? That every police department with, a couple of hundred.
I really don't know about municipalities, but with states, the 50 states, there's something like 115 state pension funds. Some only have one fund, like Florida. Some have one for teachers. And other public. Some have one for the judicial, one for the teachers, one for the other employees.
But we have a couple of them just for the city of Pensacola, which is not.
I don't know. I don't know what
what goes on.
I don't know what the pattern
what goes
is
on across the country. But do some states just incorporate all of it under the state? I know.
I probably do. I don't know that, but they probably.
Yeah, I talked to a gentleman who was.
The Florida State Fund is
doing okay.
Consistently 90 to 100% funded.
Yeah. I was talking to a guy who's a councilman, and my relatives are up in New Jersey, and he's a city councilman in a small city in New Jersey, and he's talking about, the usual problems. The property values have gone down, their ad valorem tax collections have gone down, and he's got to negotiate with his policemen because they got their own little police force. And I said, well, what about the retirement? He said, thank God that's the state's problem. That's not our problem. So his little city.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Deferred to the state.
And eventually the state will have a bigger role over here. And I'm told after a few years that it will begin to have a beneficial effect on the status of the pension funds over here. that over the long term, the state pension fund is a better deal for Pensacola than the funds they have.
Sure. Sure. Well, for a lot of reasons. I mean, the way they calculate the pensions and everything else, they're less generous, which is why there's resistance to it. But there's some thinking, and I can't speak for the mayor, but I kind of suspect he agrees with this. The city ought to be out of the defined benefit business entirely. There's nothing wrong with defined benefit plans for public employees, but let the state do it. And yeah, it will be better for us. But here we are with the 3 different unions for the police, and they've pretty much had their way up until now. I'm thinking now that public sentiment may be turning around to think that we can no longer be so generous. But what if they just bow up? What if the unions, and you're not just dealing with the retirees, you're dealing with the union, and the union has its own interests. You know, if it weren't for the retirement, there wouldn't be a big role for the union, and they want to endure, so they want to keep this going. What if they just bow up and say, well, we're not agreeing to that? Do you know what happens?
Well, you're an attorney. You tell me.
I'm not that kind of a lawyer. So, and anyway, we've just got a couple of minutes to sum up. And the good news so far has been that, well, the city has a lot of advantages, but
we have not done as well as.
What about finance? I mean, do we have? Is there any good news in the area of city finances at all? I mean, I know we've got the beach and sunshine and good feelings, but where's the money?
I'm kind of hard put to give you a clear answer on that. I think the city is managed, the financial management I think is excellent. I think it's good. I think sometimes in the past the city has not been as transparent. Sometimes you don't find out something unless you ask.
Yeah. Yeah. We have run out of time. I've greatly enjoyed having you on the show, Dr. Elebash. I really appreciate it. It's been knowledgeable. Join us next week for Within Reason. Bob will be back. Good night.